We're already seeing engagement in the chat and we haven't even started yet. So without further ado, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our final round of concurrent sessions. My name is Abigail Edwards. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I serve as coordinator of inclusion at the NCAA. Welcome to Continuing the Conversation, a racial and social justice lens. We have a phenomenal slate of individuals who you will be hearing from during today's session. Our panelists represent the 2022 NCAA MOA, or Minority Opportunities Athletic Association, Award for Diversity and Inclusion Honorable Mention recipients, the Pac-12 Conference, the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association, and DePauw University. Each member school or conference office identified one representative to share more about the initiatives, policies, and practices they each engage in that embrace diversity and inclusion within intercollegiate athletics. Our moderator for the panel today is Courtney Vinson, Senior Associate Athletics Director for Sports Administration at Northern Illinois University, the 2022 NCAA MOA Award for Diversity and Inclusion honoree. Before we begin the session, I'd like to take a moment to share some of NIU's intentional, consistent, and strategic efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion, reasons why the university received this esteemed recognition. 8 years ago, the NIU Athletics Diversity Integration Group, or DIG, was established to create an inclusive culture and climate with accessible goals. After NIU won the 2016 NCAA MOA Award for Diversity and Inclusion, yes, you heard that right, they are repeat winners, DIG put a more comprehensive action plan in motion. Since then, DIG has added diversity and cultural resource centers that provide access to campus resources and community programs. This is a great example of intentional and consistent efforts that have evolved over time to advance equity and inclusion. NIU also aims to lead by example in personal engagement and strategic planning, including hiring practices that reflect that commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. In response to protests against racial injustice after the murder of George Floyd in the summer of 2020, DIG responded by creating the Social Justice Athletics Action Plan, which leveraged collaboration, education, and technology to support NIU athletics members. We'll learn more about these efforts along with those of our honorable mention recipients throughout the session. In the summer of 2020, we witnessed an elevation in the national conversation around racial and social justice. Throughout today's program, you will hear from our presenters strategies and tools to continue this conversation 2 years later and beyond on campus and within the greater athletics community. Before I turn it over to Courtney, I'd like to share a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said, "One of the greatest liabilities of history is that all too many people fail to remain awake through great periods of social change. Every society has its proprietors of status quo and its fraternities of the indifferent who are notorious for sleeping through revolutions. Today, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. As you engage in this session, I hope you are inspired to stay awake, adjust to new ideas, remain vigilant, and face the challenge of change." Courtney, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Abigail. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of your day and spending it with us. It's greatly appreciated. For those of us who've been working in collegiate athletics for a while, I'm sure you've heard of the saying, athletics is the front porch of the institution. When I think about the work that goes into diversity, equity, and inclusion, and being the organization's front porch, I believe we want to be welcoming to our coaches, to our staff, our student athletes, our campus constituents, along with our fans, knowing and understanding we come from diverse environments. We also want to encourage our stakeholders to show up as their authentic selves, understanding that that's each of our superpower. But we have to acknowledge just showing up can be dangerous for some of us based on our race or how we identify or other factors. We must acknowledge the trauma that the summer of 2020 caused many of us. Watching the news or social media at any given moment can be triggering. And even our own personal experiences can cause us to stress. This tells me that collectively, there's so much work to be done from a racial and social justice perspective as our athletic departments actively pursue belonging. So today we hope to learn, teach, and inspire everyone listening by highlighting different approaches taken from our panelists who represent both conference offices and institutions. I would like to first introduce Teresa Gould, Deputy Commissioner, Sport Management and Institutional Services, Pac-12. I'm going to highlight one thing from each person. The Pac-12 Conference. As a result of listening sessions, town hall meetings, and individual communications, the Pac-12 Conference created platforms and opportunities to amplify voices of student athletes as the first important step to turning words into support into action, such as Change Starts With Us initiative and league-wide pre-game shows of solidarity. Next, we have Jessica Brooks, consultant for championship events and internal operations for Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association, otherwise known as the CIAA. The CIAA Board of Directors and its leadership have committed to the development of the CIAA Diversity Committee, campus visits with the CIAA Diversity and Inclusion consultant, and reporting out twice a year of the work and progress by the member institutions and the conference. There's a special focus group within SAC to identify the prevalent issues each year, to develop forums and safe space to create awareness and overcome challenges faced. And lastly, Sandra Pickett, Associate Athletics Director for Internal Operations at DePaul University. DePaul University has consistently engaged in intentional hiring practices focused on increasing diverse representation, specifically for people of color within their department. DePaul has been a recipient of both the NCAA Ethnic Minority Women's Internship Grant and the NCAA Strategic Alliance Matching Grant. With that, we're going to start with our first question, and this is for everyone to answer. Each of you have received recognition for your institutional or conference-wide efforts related to championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you please briefly share the work that you've led, facilitated, or supported surrounding racial and social justice within athletics? We can start with you, Teresa.
Awesome. Thank you, Courtney, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real privilege and honor to be able to be with you today to talk about these important topics. So at the Pac-12, 2 years ago, we had a real commitment from our presidents, chancellors, athletic directors, faculty reps, and SWAs to make a real commitment to this work. Oftentimes, this work is done at the campus level. So we spent a lot of time talking about what our role would be from the conference. So our first effort was really to put the structure in place. We thought it was really important that we had strong conference-wide leadership behind these efforts and that we are aligned across all 12 of our campuses. So I know Courtney referenced this, but one of the things we did right away was come up with a group that we call our Impact Leadership Council. And the Impact Leadership Council is a group made up of 4 athletic directors, 4 faculty reps, 4 SWAs, and a number of student athletes. And they really provided strategic guidance and counsel to the conference staff and our presidents and chancellors around what's important in this anti-racism social justice space. So we first put that group in place to make sure that we were all aligned across the conference in terms of what our priorities are. Another important piece of the structure and getting the structure in place was making sure that we had a direct connection to our student athletes of color on our campuses. We wanted to make sure that everything that we did was advised and informed by our student athletes and connected back to the student athlete experience. So we created a subcommittee of that impact group that meets quarterly with the BSAA leads from all 12 of our campuses. Those are always very powerful conversations and really helpful in terms of us prioritizing our work across the conference. I would say the last thing that we did was really develop a framework and some strategic focus around which we would build our various initiatives, which I know we'll talk about later, Courtney. But we really have 4 fundamental pillars around our social justice work. The first one is amplification of our collective voices. We think it's really important at the conference level that we kind of leverage the platform and the voices across 12 member institutions to really elevate our voice in this space and to really be beacons of change and positivity around these topics. So amplify our collective voice was pillar number 1. The second one was educate and inform. The conference has played a very active role in making sure that we're pushing out opportunities across the conference for all of our stakeholders, coaches, administrators, student athletes, to educate themselves and grow in terms of their knowledge in this space. The third pillar was one around policy and regulatory change. Obviously, as a conference, we have the opportunity to set policy and create regulations for ourselves and through the NCAA. So that was the third pillar that we created. And then the fourth one was community engagement and really seeking out community partners within our 12 campus communities that could partner with us to be leaders of change. So I would say, Courtney, that the 2 most critical things that we did from the center to really launch our efforts would be create the leadership structure and then have that strategic framework around our work.
That's awesome, Teresa. Jessica, you want to jump in?
Sure. Similar to what Teresa said at the conference level. And then also I will say this, working at an HBCU conference, working with HBCU institutions, I think it's a little different for us as this conversation has always been kind of part of our logistics within DEI. But I think I'll say this, the year that we got the recognition, it was a full year of no competition. So I think it gave us the ability to kind of look at things differently and really just invest time and connect a bit differently, especially as eyes were opened outside of just our institutions. And social injustices, specifically around race, were brought to the forefront. Our student athletes and SAC were very motivated just to get involved and determine how they can make an impact. So one of the things we first did was kicked off the year by partnering with the NAACP, their legal and defense branch, and the educational, just to host a voter education session where information on how to get registered and just the overall process works, where to locate data and background on issues, and also how to handle challenges that you may run into, which was really interesting to me because I've actually run into challenge in voting and had to stay an extra hour, things like that, and how people are targeted differently for that. So it was just nice to know that reinforcement of how important your vote is and how excited our student athletes were about those efforts. I think another thing we did was just continuous mental health check-ins. They were hosted in collaboration with a lot of our different partners, but just allowed administrators, coaches, student athletes to come together in a different space and bring up some of the challenges and issues, allowing experts to kind of just provide coping mechanisms. But I think the biggest component of that was just allowing them to know they're not alone in their struggles as you face all of these things, but also what that mental wellness aspect can look like for Black people based on history, biases, and just the overall current events that were and continue to happen. And then the final thing is the tournament edition that I'll share is actually our virtual vibe tournament edition. And that was actually what we submitted. And we received a lot of feedback when we decided we weren't having our tournament. It's just truly a reunion outside of the aspect of, although the games and student athletes are the focus point of that week, it's a huge priority for the community as well. So Commissioner charged us to make that virtual. I was like, what? So although it seemed challenging, the week we actually hosted sessions on financial literacy, vaccinations within the Black community, COVID, cash crisis was a session, mental well-being, self-preservation, high school education day, career expo. There were a few others as well, but we did concerts, performances, chat rooms, which was really fun. And we concluded with our in-person shoe distribution in partnership with Samaritan's Feet. And they hosted it at Bowie State University, one of our institutions, and our student athletes led the charge for that. So I just want to encourage people to know that there's lots that can be done in the scope of advocating in this space. And it doesn't always have to be the typical things that you think of, but just more so providing education and connection to resources just to continue the conversation and also transition into some type of action. So that's where
That's awesome, Jessica. I want to jump in just from your perspective when talking about like how to engage student athletes. I know as we were working through our, well, honestly, our DIG action plan is its own entity, but we created a social justice plan specifically for what was happening that began in the summer of 2020. And some of the things for us, like off rip was we were all like, we're in the state of Illinois, so we were all in our homes. And having to create this plan that had to be completely virtual. And, you know, we are mandating our student athletes and we're mandating our coaches and staff to be a part of these different things. That in itself can be a challenge, but the part that I enjoyed the most about it as I was working through it was just getting the information from our student athletes. I remember the first thing I did was I picked 6 student athletes, there's different sports, different genders, different race, and just asked literally, what do you think? Like, what is it that you think? And the interesting part is everybody is in a different space, just based on where you're from, the type of history that you know, things that you've been privy to or not. And so that kind of got us started just from a perspective of where do we need to start with our student athletes. And from there, we were able to engage our history professors, and we were able to engage different people on campus just to help us through this process. I know one of the first things I did was contact our Center of Black Studies and just find out how are they helping their students. And in that, we were able to figure out different ways to help our students and actually collaborate. I want to ask one question before I go to Asandra though. Teresa, can you repeat again the 4 pillars?
Yeah, the 4 pillars that we used for our framework, and then we bundled all of our various initiatives within these 4 pillars. The first one was amplify our collective voices. The second one was educate and inform. The third one was leverage our governance to create policy and regulation changes. And the fourth one was engage with our community.
Thank you for that. Asandra, can you talk about what you were able to do at DePaul?
Sure, thank you. So at DePaul, being a small liberal arts Division III school, it takes everyone. It takes a team effort to complete any of these tasks. And so with this starting in 2020, it was the summertime, it was kind of quiet, but we had one of our former administrators, Cherno Diallo, when there was like those peaceful protests out there, he made sure to email people to let them know like what's going on. And I was also partnering with the NAACP. We have a branch here in Greencastle that they started, I think, right before maybe COVID was around. So just those partnerships with the local town, even though we were in a small town, we were able to partner with them. And then just being present. I think the biggest thing with being an administrator is just being there, being out in the front, using my own voice, using my own platform, because since I experienced this as a Black woman, so being there for students, and then also our athletic director. Our athletic director makes sure to send messages out to the different student athletes to know that us as administrator and coaches, we are here for them. So just doing things, once it got into the fall, we did a bunch of town halls. We had a committee in our athletic department made up of like one administrator and maybe 2 coaches to come up with different programs that we can do with our student athletes and coaches. So being virtual and being at home, it was a little bit easier to plan it, especially when you didn't have events on campus. So we just had a series of town halls. And then at DePaul, we also have a a day of dialogue that we started years before that. And so that's just the university coming together, faculty, staff, and students to talk about these different subjects. So it was just a variety of things. I think we did RISE program too. RISE is a program I'll probably talk about a little bit later. And 122 consultant. It was just different groups that we brought in. So it was just a collective team effort from everyone at DePaul, and using our resources in-house, but also using our resources out of house too.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I do want to remind the audience to please use the question and answer area, and we will absolutely get to your questions as we work through this session. The next question I want to ask the panel is about who you all partnered. And we mentioned it a little bit in our first answer, but who do we partner with specifically with or within our athletic department, outside our athletic department? Where were you able to find the most assistance in being able to provide the resources that your student athletes, coaches, and staff needed? We can start with Sandra on that one.
So on campus, we have a Center for Diversity and Inclusion building or area. So we partner with them a lot. Also, we have our student affairs, just people in-house too. And then our own coaches, our student athlete advisory committee, we have a student athlete of color group. So working with our own student athletes and people in-house. And then, as I mentioned, we had our Team DePaul Embrace, like our town hall meetings. And so in those meetings was like focus on opportunities around recruiting and retaining student athletes of color, sparking conversation about social justice. So using our own resources in our department. But also we use the RISE program. Like I said, RISE is just, they had different modules, and with RISE, they train our coaches and our administrators, and then the coaches and administrators train the student athletes. And then the student athletes do the program with their peers on their team. So we just kind of, even though we were doing that before, we kind of brought that back. And then also we had the 122 consulting group who completed 2 Zoom workshops for our coaches, staff, and student athletes. So it was a combination of using our in-house resources, but also using the RISE and the 122 consulting.
Yeah, that's definitely, that's awesome. But also, like for us, we weren't really able to use outside, again, this COVID thing and how the state of Illinois operated, and then how we operated on our own campus. We are lucky to have an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and they provided a lot of help to us, particularly as I was working through our action plan for our social justice action plan specifically. But all of our different resource centers had something unique to offer. And it was really good for me to be able to, number one, have those relationships because of how our diversity and integration group operates. When I took it over, when I started here, I made sure to just, up the ante a little bit, didn't want to do the same things we did before. So inviting all those cultural center directors to the table way before COVID hit. So when I needed some help, it was like, okay, we've been working together for 2 years. It wasn't like they didn't know who I was. So it was like a perfect situation, just in terms of the camaraderie that we already built in trying to update our plan and moving forward just in this space. So one of the things that we did when I contacted our Center of Black Studies, they happened to have a therapist for their Black students, for our Black students on campus. So for our Black student athletes, I had them join the session. And that was like completely helpful. And I got a lot of feedback from our student athletes our Black student athletes who were able to utilize that. Using the professors to give a brief history lesson so all our student athletes actually knew how this started. Like I had a couple student athletes in those focus groups that said, I have no idea how this started. Like I just woke up one day and it seemed like the world was burning. And it caught me off guard because, in my world, it's like, how do you not know? But that's short-sighted of me because everybody doesn't have the same experiences as I do. And so for me, it was taking a step back, truly listening to our student athletes, and then finding the professor, or 2 professors in our case, who was able to create a history lesson that was about an hour and a half, and we did it in 3 sessions, football being its own, and then we separated the rest of the sports in 2 other ones. And it ended up being awesome dialogue, just because there are certain things that they didn't know. And like we learned about redlining as a group. We learned about different things that affects different neighborhoods, just some basic stereotypes, just so we are just dismantling these belief systems that society sometimes provides that we just have to kind of, let's just rebuild, which is the beauty about being in college in general. It's the opportunity to learn, it's the opportunity to grow. It's the opportunity to truly listen to where we are, where our students are, and for us as administrators to meet them where they are and let's grow together. Same thing with our coaches, same thing with our administrators. Teresa, can you talk a little bit about Teresa, can you talk a little bit about where you were and just, no, I am sorry, Sandra, can you talk, I think I'm backwards. Jessica, can you talk a little bit about where we are in this space for you? Sorry about that.
Sure. At our conference, obviously, we work with the membership and use NCAA resources to the fullest as well, but we're also really blessed to work with lots of sponsors just due to having that larger platform thanks to our basketball tournament. And fortunately, during this time, many of them did reach out and just looking to assist with different initiatives that allowed us to activate in our communities and still engage at a time where dollars weren't as flexible. So some of our corporate sponsors like Nationwide, Food Lion, Toyota, Lowe's worked with us on that virtual platform. Esports was a big component with getting minorities into that tech area. We also have Nevin Capel, who is one of our consultants for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's been with us for the past 6 years, who hopped on calls with us, do check-ins, and also doing the mental health check-ins as well. We work with NFL for programming around mental health, where Dr. Nalanthi on their team came in to visit campuses, did QPR training, worked with student athletes and administrators to kind of bridge the gap for the counseling centers. And they also hosted a networking session to work on building the pipeline professionally. And so I think I mentioned already too that we work with NAACP for the voters education. We also work with the human rights campaign. So just really using and touching base with your current partners is huge. You never know. I think a lot of people are interested on an outside scope of working with campuses and institutions and conferences based on marketing deliverables, but presenting other opportunities, you just never know what you're going to get. And then also just touching base with your conference, because they might sometimes also have connections or partnerships that can trickle down too as well.
Thank you for that, Jessica. I want to lead into our next question, and really because I know we all face them, and we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but challenges that you've experienced in your athletic department or conference office when moving the needle and advancing racial and social justice, and how are you able to handle them? Teresa, we'll start with you for that one.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think one that probably everybody in this space, faces at some point. And I would say that some of those challenges at the conference office are similar, and some of them are different, right? I would say one of the first challenges that we had to tackle was really hearing from our membership, what role did they want the conference to play in this space? Right. So, 2 of our panelists are from campuses and 2 of us are from conference offices. And I think conference office work is very different, right? You all have DEIB efforts on your campus. You all have strategic plans. You have educational initiatives. So one of the first challenges was for us to really ask the philosophical question to our membership, what role do you want us to play? Right? What is the role for us from the center? And I think we landed on a place where we arrived at, we weren't here to duplicate what was happening on campus. We were here to kind of supplement and enhance the efforts on our campuses and to identify those opportunities for tools that were available to us across all 12 that made sense to leverage at the conference office, right? So we almost had this kind of philosophical decision tree, like what makes sense to scale at the league level versus what do we want to leave locally to our campuses, right? And I think that lens was very helpful. So I think once we did that, I would say the two other challenges are, number one, we kind of rolled out and launched this effort like many folks in the middle of COVID, right? So, staff departures, financial issues, everybody's running around like crazy, working 70 to 80 hours a week, and just kind of getting the time commitment and the emotional commitment to carve out time and make it a priority to do this work. That in and of itself was a challenge when you're trying to run sporting events in the middle of a global pandemic. And then I'd say the third challenge, Courtney, was, anytime you're dealing with 12 institutions, all with different political landscapes in their communities, like getting philosophical alignment in terms of our initiatives and our messages and what our priorities are moving forward is never an easy thing.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine. Trying to get that on a campus can be difficult. So doing 12, yeah, I can see the challenge in that, definitely. Asandra, can you tell me about what you experienced on a campus level? Just some challenges.
So Teresa kind of hit on this a little bit. Being at a small campus, we don't have as many, like a designated person for this. And so it goes a lot on our coaches and our administrators. So it's just one, not trying to overburden someone, but like I said, it takes a team effort to do it. And also the challenge of quality over quantity. Of course, you want to do a lot, but you want to make sure it's of quality. So I think those are probably our two biggest challenges. And then probably our third challenge is people wanted to do something, but not knowing what to do and being afraid to do something, just that fear of messing up. So it's just getting people to get outside their shell and knowing that doing something is better than not doing anything at all and just sitting silent. So it's just more, and we had departures too, like the main person leading things departed. So it's just like, where else do we go? Who else can take on that load? But knowing that once we had sports going back and all sports going at the same time, it's just making sure we hold ourselves accountable and continue in those conversations.
Okay, that's good. Let me ask this question just in terms of challenges. As you were doing this work on your campus or in the conference office, did you have challenges with people at all? And if you did, can you tell me what that looked like and how you worked through that? That's for anybody.
I mean, I would say that there are certainly challenges in terms of different levels of philosophical buy-in.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of different leaders, whether it be campus leaders or folks in our conference office, having different levels of commitment in terms of the importance of the work. And that really had to be dealt with at the leadership level, right? Where the leadership of our campuses and the leadership of our conference had to be really clear and deliberate that this is part of who we are. This is part of what we value, and that it is a priority and is going to be embedded in everything that we do, and that it's expected of every single individual in our office, right? We don't have a full-time person right now. We are in the process of being one of two Division I conferences who hire a full-time person. So we will have a full-time chief people and inclusion officer very soon. But it was made very clear that this was not optional work, that this was, really to be embedded in all of our jobs. And I think that was really the only way that we could approach it to get some of those folks on board with this being a priority.
Yeah, that's good. I know for us, I come from a compliance background, and compliance can only be done inside the compliance office. It's a shared responsibility. So we take the same approach. I have a question in the chat. How would you propose a college or university with a mostly white campus to talk about race and social justice, as well as continuing to grow? We have trainings and athletic-wide talks, but our university hasn't. We have a growing number of diverse students in athletics at our school. I think a lot of our staff are afraid to talk about this topic because we are mostly white campus.
I'm saying I can kind of tackle that a little bit. I think it starts with the leadership from the top down. I think in becoming DePaul is a predominantly white institution, and coming here and just knowing that I have a voice here and actually sharing that voice, and even our students, our AAAS students have spoken up and had meetings with president. And so I think it just starts with the top down and having that, if it is a priority on the campus, that means something should be done. So starting with however your chain of command is, mine is the VP or athletic director, VP, then president, but just having those conversations and being willing to, as a leadership, if it's important to them, they should step up and do something.
So one of the things that is said often in our DIG meetings, we talk about like these safe spaces, and we can only make it but so safe. They're really courageous spaces. Our VP for our academic diversity, equity, and inclusion says that a lot. It's courageous spaces. And so, yes, it's uncomfortable. And yes, it can be awkward, but the reality is just based on where we're moving, the conversations have to be had. So it's just about having the courage to do so, and making sure that we're listening to our student athletes, and making sure we're listening to our staff, make sure we're listening to our coaches, and we're guiding as best we can. And if we don't have the resources to, then let's find the person or the group or the organization that can help us and assist us in this manner. This next question is really about student athlete activism. I'm gonna ask Asandra and Jessica to tackle this one. I'm gonna give some statistics. According to the 2020 Student Athlete Activism and Racial Justice Engagement Study, nearly 90% of student athletes surveyed indicated that they had conversations focused on race or racial justice with their families or friends within the prior 6 months. Approximately 80% indicated that they made an effort to learn about race or racial justice on their own. Overall, just half of all the participants indicated having conversations with their coaches about race and racial justice. How do you encourage and empower your student athletes to utilize their voice and platform around racial and social justice issues? And how do you amplify and support their efforts?
I can talk about a few things we've done from the conference level that certainly would be, maybe different than what happens on campus. I'd say a few different things. From the very beginning, when we launched this framework and these initiatives, we were very clear and very deliberate that we were going to follow the student athlete voice, right? That our 7,000 student athletes in the Pac-12 are why we exist. It's why we all have jobs. It's who we're here to serve. And that everything we do is going to be centered on what we hear from them. So a few different things that we've done to try to elevate their voice. I mentioned earlier the BSAA subcommittee. So we have one AD, one SWA, and one faculty rep that meet on a quarterly basis with our BSAA leads from every campus. So that's one way that they have kind of direct access to the decision makers in our conference to be able to share their voice. I'd say the second thing is we have financially invested in leadership development of our student athletes in our communities of color. We have a leadership grant program where we provide funding to student athletes from underrepresented communities on all of our campuses to go to a leadership development program of their choosing, so that we're investing in them and their leadership development. And I certainly think student athlete activism is part of that. We did have a conference meeting at the Black Student Athlete Summit a couple weeks ago, where our DEIB officers that were there had a dinner or a mixer, and they had a series of roundtable discussions to talk about the student athlete experience on our campuses. And I think that certainly facilitated a lot of dialogue and a lot of opportunity to encourage them to get involved and be more active. And then the last thing I would say is we are about to embark on, kind of a historic trip in the month of July, where the Pac-12 conference, in conjunction with the ACC and the Big Ten, are taking 200 student athletes and staff to Selma and Montgomery to do kind of a historic field trip around the history of civil rights in our country, and more specifically, the role that students played in that history. So there will be a number of activities that we engage in during this field trip with our student athletes that are really intended not only to help educate, but also to inspire them to use their voice and be more active from a student athlete perspective.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think this wave of student athletes are quite different, and the encouragement to speak up for me, and I am the SAC liaison for our office, our advisor for our office as well. But the encouragement to speak up is not necessarily needed all the time. The confidence and ability for a lot of our student athletes are there. I think similar to how some of the programming that they're doing, the support in kind of making sure they're ready and prepared to navigate those conversations, and that they actually achieve their goals through being organized and understanding politics on campus is important. So I think making sure they're knowledgeable and educated on the topics, and then just aware of the potential impact. So that listening and helping to elevate their initiatives or programming to support their goals is extremely, extremely important.
Yeah. One of the things that I realized about student athletes in general, mine included, they're going to say what they're going to say. We can act like we want to frame it the way that we want to frame it, and we want to give them some kind of length. Not the way social media works. If they have something to say, they're going to say it. So for us, we have a student athlete diversity and inclusion committee. And so when it was time for them to make their statements, and we actually ended up we had a student athlete rally, and they had speeches, and they ran through their speeches. Like I was the facilitator of the committee. So each person ran through their speeches. I doctored almost nothing, because I know good and well that if I doctored something, they're going to say what they want to say. So for us, I guess my approach to it was just give them the opportunity to use their words, because their words are powerful. Honestly, if we just take the time to listen, I believe that this generation can take us into the right direction without a doubt. I'm going to close on this question, but please ask questions in the Q&A chat that we can answer. What steps can we take? And this is for everybody. What steps can we take to seize the moment and continue the movement in racial and social justice?
I think it's kind of what we just kind of spoke about too, just being authentic, educating yourself, and then advocating by speaking up for what you believe is right. And I think educating others with that is important too. And it takes courage, but I think that's the biggest step to take.
I think from my end is just more of not just checking the boxes of going to an event or attending a conference, but also applying it every single day, because this doesn't disappear. I'm always going to be here walking around as a Black woman, and I experience it every single day. And so having that voice and applying it every single day, not just checking a box, and just keep growing and learning as a person, and knowing that there's always a time to learn something, because you never know when that moment's going to come up where you have to step in. So just keep going, keep learning, and just not checking a box.
Teresa?
Yeah, I would just say, just to echo what my colleagues said, we've had to be really intentional around kind of strategy versus activity. I think it's really easy in this space to just constantly be reacting, and there's never a shortage of good ideas. But to be really intentional around, what are you hearing from your community? What is the circumstance that we're trying to improve? And then developing specific strategies to address that. And I think that's where our 4 pillars came from, because we knew we needed to attack it from a lot of different vantage points, and it needed to be, kind of more than just a PR or amplification exercise, that there needed to be policy, there needed to be education, there needed to be changes in a lot of different areas. But in order to do that, we had to be really intentional and be willing to say no to some things to focus on the things that would make the greatest impact.
Yeah, agreed. When we were creating our DIG action plan, which has a lot of education in it, our social justice action plan has a lot of education in it. One of the things that I realized is that people have a lot of questions, and it's important to be patient in answering the questions, regardless of how you or whomever the question is being asked or put toward feel about it internally. We have to be patient with people, period. Like, this is a area that we have to grow in. We need space and grace. Everybody is not going to come here with the same experience as a Black woman, or whatever you identify as. So space and grace is one of the things that I always try to keep in my mind as I'm doing this work on our campus. Audience questions. Do any of you have advice for dealing with donors who are against diversity and creating safe spaces for student athletes? Being at a small school it is not as simple as just finding money somewhere else. For me, a part of this, like, we're all here to support student athletes. Like, if you're a fan, you're here to support your institution and student athletes that represent your institution. So one of the things that I have said to donors, and when similar questions are asked, is we're here to support our students. If this is how they feel, and this is what they're passionate about, and them just being seen, like truly seen for exactly who they are, and being able to experience this world in a way that we can allow them, again, that space and grace to do so. And as the donor, just understanding, or at least trying to help them get there. And that the way that you feel, like, clearly, if you have this is me thinking in the back of my head, you feel this way because of how you experience the world. Can we just take a moment and see and try, just how do you think their experience has been based on what we've seen in these last couple of years? And so that's kind of how I just kind of frame it as a situation. We're here to support our student athletes. So that's what we're going to do. Anybody has anything to add to that?
Courtney, I have something. That was one of our earliest initiatives in the conference was around fan and donor behavior. I would say that concerns from our student athletes about the experiences they have with fans and donors, whether it be in venue or over social media, that was one of the number one concerns that was expressed, was kind of racist and hateful behavior that they were experiencing. So we responded in 3 different ways. Number one, we actually changed our conference policy and our conference regulation around sportsmanship. And our sportsmanship expectations now actually have language in there around fans and donors. So that was the policy step that we took. The second one was we established a fan and donor working group of external staff across all of our campuses. So marketing people, communications people, ticket officers. And we have this conference-wide toolkit that our member institutions access to promote positive behaviors in support of student athletes and also educate and create expectations. So whether it's video board, PSAs, inserts that go into season ticket renewals, but there's a deliberate kind of Pac-12 approach across all of our campuses in terms of promoting the right behaviors and the values that we embody in support of our student athletes. And then the third thing we did is we also have a new conference policy that requires every institution to have an anonymous reporting platform so that when there are behaviors that are not appropriate, that student athletes very clearly know where to go to report these behaviors. So those were kind of the 3 things that we did in response to hearing concerns from our student athletes in this space.
Thank you for that, Teresa. I have another question. Do any of you have suggestions on dealing with hesitant leadership? Do we have any of that just in the conference office? Well, I would think from a conference office perspective and dealing with so many different institutions, you may have some type of interaction with that.
I think I would kind of direct or go back to kind of what you said. And I think it directly reflects to what are your student athletes looking for, what's going to make them their experience the best. And if that's something that's an issue, that's kind of where we lead from. Every information or voice that we get starts with our association. The staff is on those primary associations. So I would say your leadership would have to kind of really reflect on, the why behind why you're there or what's going on and how you advocate for that. It's really just getting a better understanding of where the student athletes voices are coming from and what they need.
Yeah, I'm gonna take a different take on this one. So when civil rights movements started, it started from grassroots. So if it comes from the students and they have to, work their way, do the work, and then eventually leadership has to catch up just because our students and, there'll probably be staff that will be involved in helping them get that, be able to get their voices heard in a way that leadership can hear and they understand, like, this is where we are. Again, just don't be afraid of your students' voices. Like they will be able to create their own grassroots thing and slowly get to a point where leadership doesn't have a choice but to catch up. I have one more question. What role does or should education play? Amplification is important, but it's truly understanding how systems work. Civic engagement is still the most impactful vehicle of change, but how much do we really teach, engage in it? There is how we feel versus what is real. Would love to hear your thoughts.
I feel like education plays a huge role in it, but also I learned with the education piece of it that, like, me sharing my story and actually going through it and having that connection with student athletes is what actually moves it a little bit more. So I feel like you can educate, but also those real life experiences what puts the education into place. So I feel like we can go and talk about the system and how everything is disproportionate, but I think also at the same time with the education piece is also the experience piece. I'm not saying that I have to be a spokesperson for every Black woman out there, but I also learned that, like, sharing my own story, sharing what I go through, and actually having that connection with student athletes is kind of what helped move it a little bit along, and also being that advocate. So I think education is a good thing to have. And I know we've had in the past, like maybe growing up, history lessons and how things used to be. And so we can read a lot, but I think I'm more the application, like, let's apply it.
Yeah, we at NIU, I asked my assistant VP for academic diversity, equity, and inclusion, and my athletic director, Sean T. Frazier, to moderate a session with our coaches and staff where we addressed, like, a lot of different things. We addressed microaggressions, we addressed leading from the seat that you're in. Just taking the time to go through that with our coaches and staff, which ended up having, that was talked about for a while. But that, I guess, is to your point, educating from, okay, so yeah, this is education, you can find this in the book, but this is my experience, or this is the experience, or this is what I'm experiencing as a student athlete or a coach or a staff member. I've found that people, to your point, Asandra, respond a little bit better in understanding that this is my living experience. And I have found to this point that people are a little bit more willing to listen, particularly on college campuses. Not necessarily applies to all the world, but on college campuses where we are literally trying to make sure that we're putting out whole human beings by the time they finish their process. That's just something that I found has worked. Anybody else? All right. So thank you for attending this session. We really do appreciate it. I'd like to thank the panelists and congratulate them for the work that they've done in their conference offices, as well as institutions. Thank you to the participants for participating. And I hope that you all were able to take away something from this that you can take to your organizations and institutions. It's important to note that racial and social justice is not a hot topic. It's something that we are going to be dealing with for a long time. So let's make sure that we're taking the time and doing intentional work to be able to move this needle forward. To note, please nominate your institution and conference office for the NCAA MOA Award for Diversity and Inclusion in September. As we're doing this work, just make sure you're documenting everything. You'd be surprised what you come up with by the time it's time to complete the application process. I know I was blown away when it was time for me to put it together. So just take the time and document. In September, please apply. And for any other DEI awards and recognitions, please visit the NCAA's Office of Inclusion website. Please complete the post-session survey on the virtual platform. You will receive a survey link from the Office of Inclusion within 2 weeks to capture feedback of today's session and the Inclusion Forum experience. Lastly, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Inclusion Forum program will resume at 4:45 Eastern with the keynote session. It's time, kicking glass, breaking barriers, and inspiring social change with basketball legend, entrepreneur, and NBA broadcast analyst, Candace Parker. Thank you for your time, and we appreciate you for attending. Oh, also, please engage with us on social media using the hashtag NCAA Inclusion and hashtag Title 950.
Great job, Courtney.
Thank you.
You guys are awesome.